Welcome to the Healed Approach podcast, the place where bold ideas meets real action in sustainability, inclusion, and innovation. I'm Rebecca Heald, and each episode I sit down with industry trailblazers from architects and construction leaders to change makers across the board to uncover transformative strategies driving a greener, more equitable future. Whether you're here to learn about passive house standards, embodied carbon, or how inclusion sparks innovation, this is the podcast to inspire your next big move. Ready to challenge the status quo? Let's get started. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Healed Approach podcast. Now, it will be the new year now when you're listening to this, but this is actually the last podcast that I'm recording of 2025. And I'm super pleased to say that I'm joined by Billy Mollison. Welcome, Billy, and thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for the invitation.
So I'm going to let Billy introduce himself in a minute, but I just wanted to share with everybody where we met, where I came across Billy. So recently, quite recently, as in 2 days ago, I did a carbon literacy training course, and Billy was leading it. And it was, honestly, I think it was super insightful and a real catalyst, I think, for some things that I'm going to hopefully be doing next year. And hopefully Billy will be involved in some of that. So, of course, I wanted him to come on to the podcast. So, Billy, please, can you just tell everybody where you're from, and then we can dig deep into where we want to go with this?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation as well.
No.
And the nice words about the course that we ran a couple of days back. Billy Mollison, I own Peak Governance Business Advisors, and I'm also a co-founder in an organisation called Find a Business Expert. But in Peak Governance Business Advisors, we concentrate, we do a lot of business consulting, do a lot of business training as well, but we concentrate mainly on sustainability, climate change, and how that relates to risk management and the organisation of the structure of an organisation. So there's quite a lot involved in that, obviously. In terms of where I come from, originally Dundee, but I left there as soon as I possibly could, and I had no intention of going back. Moved to Glasgow as soon as I possibly could do that. But then since then, I've worked in a lot of different places. Some in the UK, I've also worked in Ireland, I've worked in the Middle East, I've worked in America, I've worked in Bermuda, done some work in China, and also in the Philippines and places like that. So I've bounced around quite a lot. But yeah, that's me. As anybody, that's me.
Thank you, Billy. And also a big football fan.
A huge football fan.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that I should tell you people who are going to listen to this podcast what teams I've got season tickets for, or what clubs I've got season tickets for, but I do have one for Scotland and one for England, and it's and I love my football.
My top might give a little bit away.
Might give a wee bit away for my season ticket down here. Yeah, that's fair comment. By the way, now I no longer live in Scotland. I'll now live in Peterborough, just in the centre of Peterborough. So I cover the business that we've got covers, it's global. We've got strategic partnerships in Botswana, different parts of Africa. Also got strategic partnerships in America and also in Canada. And we're looking at setting up one in Holland in the very near future. So we do cover a lot of ground in terms of the geographic area that we cover.
Interesting. I might delve into that a little bit, actually, as we move forward. And by the way,
by all means.
By the way, I just want to say that I came across Peak Governance because you were a couple of people recommended the course to me. So I just want to say, I didn't come across just by looking online. It was actually through word of mouth recommendation. So anybody who is listening, it's a brilliant course. If this is something that you're interested in, go and check it out. But I really, really want to ask, from your experience, sorry, Billy, I know that you work across industries, but what would you say are the biggest misconceptions or the biggest challenges that leaders in construction industry particularly face when it comes to sustainability and climate change? Because it was a fascinating conversation that we had last week, and I'd love to delve into it a bit more today.
There's a lot of things in that, particularly in the construction industry. I think for a start, there's far too few women in the construction industry, particularly at senior levels. And because of that, you don't get the cross-fertilisation of ideas. You don't get the different ideas that you can get. I'm not, got to be careful what you say about women these days because different people have different views. But that's one of the first things. I think also the construction industry, in terms of sustainability specifically, is that the way it's structured, too many companies, particularly big companies, too many companies do what they've always done and want to do what they've always done. And they're not, in my experience, and I've worked with quite a few of them, in my experience, they're not immediately open to new ideas, different types of materials, different suppliers, different ways of constructing things. Nowadays, of course, in the construction industry, refurbishment as opposed to rebuilding is a big issue as well. And I don't really think that the leaders in the larger companies in the construction industry pay enough attention to the developments in terms of the types of materials that can be used, how those materials fit together, what that means in terms of sustainability, if you want to call it that. There's also now a big issue in relation to should we get heat pumps? Should we put solar panels in? Many people are doing that. But linked to that, there's also the issue of the fact that the government, and it doesn't matter what government you're talking about, I'm not worried about what colour of government that people think about. There's no strategic plan in this nation whatsoever. And there's not enough money spent on it either.
No.
I could go on, but I'll shut up now and let you ask me again.
No. I think you've picked on some really important points there. And I want to just pick up on what you said about the strategic planning, because I think this is the issue, isn't it? Is that it's always any planning that we do, it's never for long enough because the government never knows how long it's going to be in position for. And then that's on the macro level. So what's happening on the micro level for me is quite similar. Businesses are not strategically looking at this and they are not investing enough time and money in this. And from the outside looking in, it doesn't necessarily always seem that way because there's a lot of rhetoric around it. There's a lot, we hear about lots of big organizations that have got quotas where they want to, meet net zero. They want to, contribute or do better when it comes to circularity. They want to get 50-50 women, which are just, all well and good. But those quotas and that rhetoric on it by itself isn't going to change anything, is it?
No. I could comment on a few of those things. First of all, I think putting quotas on things and time limits to get to those quotas is wrong, because then to be perfectly honest, to get 50-50 between women and men in any organisation is relatively straightforward if you've got the mindset to it. But that doesn't necessarily mean you're getting the best people. Exactly. And I think that's another thing we've got to look at. Who are the best people for the jobs?
Exactly.
And that's in the construction industry. There's a lot of different skills needed. Everybody knows that. So that's one aspect of it. I think the point about strategic visions, we do a lot of consultancy work with a lot of different companies, including the construction industry. And honestly, you'd be amazed at the number of companies we go into and say, the first thing we always ask is, what is your strategy? And the number of companies who do not have one, or it's the strategy in somebody's head, but there's nothing to refer to. So they really don't know they're meeting the strategy or not. They've got views on it, but they don't have any real benchmarks documented to hit that strategy. And that's a real concern. Also, to get to net zero, what does net zero mean?
Yeah.
In the context of what this government in the UK, whatever call it is, because very few people know that net zero in the UK means that it's not just a question of taking out the amount of greenhouse gases we put in by 2050, which I don't think will happen anyway. But also, it's about what's the benchmark. And the benchmark's actually 1990.
Okay.
And very few people know that.
No, I didn't know.
And if you look at the sixth strategic plan of the budget, which was published in 2021, I think, relating to how the UK would tackle climate change, that's well hidden. That fact is well hidden. But it's an important one, because when you talk about climate change, the vast majority of people who train different organisations, we talk about the difference between the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, which is where most of the real problems, I think, began, and not 1990. So there's that kind of dichotomy. You also need money. If you're going to combat climate change, you need money. Does that answer your question? Personally?
Yeah, no, I think, and I want to go back to, and that's really interesting. I didn't know that either. But I wanted to go back to what you said there about 50-50 quotas, because I think, like you just said there, it's about getting the right people, and this. The problem is that it can almost work against men and women, to be honest, because I mean the amount of times when you hear, well, they've got the job because they're a woman and they've got a quota to fill, or they've got the job because they are black and we've got a quota to fill, or whatever, and it's not doing anybody any favors, is it? No. And I think, and I, like you said as well about the construction industry, I mean, who's to say that 50-50 is where it needs to be anyway? If you, like you said, there are different skills, there are different trades, and actually the happiest, healthiest construction industry there might still be a minority of women, but there needs to be more than we have at the moment, because if we don't have more women, if we don't have more diverse thinking, then things are never going to change. And I think this is a big issue. I think we spoke about this on the course as well, is for me, I think we're in a position where we've got so much opportunity to drive forward with sustainability. We have, in terms of materials, in terms of legislation, in terms of regulations, in terms of knowledge and awareness out there's enough of it. What we don't have is the leaders to drive it forward. We don't have the vision to drive it forward. And it's still lots of good things happening in pockets and not everybody working together.
I agree with that. I think another aspect of it is that if you go to seek somebody in the construction, whether it's a plumber, a joiner, a builder, doesn't matter what it is, you cannot find them. I mean, the builder I work with, or one of the builders that we work with, got a 3-year waiting list before he can take on another project. Why is that? And that's partly because, to a degree, the construction industry still has this aura of being a dirty industry in terms of you go out in the morning, you're out in all weathers. That's a fact of life in the construction industry in most cases. You're getting soaking wet, you're getting roasted hot in the summer, you're getting filthy every day in life, you come back, whatever. We don't encourage youngsters to join the construction. I mean, when I was younger, one of the first jobs I had when I was younger, when I was still at school, with a lot of building sites around us in those days. And I worked effectively as just a gopher, basically a very low-level labourer. But I'll tell you what, you learned a lot. You learned a lot about life. So you knew what kind of things you were going to, what type of people you're dealing with. You knew the types of construction materials that they had. You knew what the mixture of different materials was. But you were communicating about the construction, and you were actually learning not just about the industry, but about life. And one of the issues I've got now, and I talk to people on the construction industry training board time and time again about this, is that when they train people nowadays, the vast majority of training is done in a college. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. But unless these youngsters are going to be given the opportunity to get on site, they're not going to pick up the skills they need. And if they're not getting women in at that level, how in the name of God can we get women in at the higher levels? Yeah, it's possible, but not in the numbers that we need. Because the diversity that you mentioned is vital. I worked in the banking industry for a long time, and that was the same. I mean, it's just like, women at the top of the tree, oh my God, no. And then women began to get to the top of the tree, and everybody thought, hey, wait a minute, this is good.
Finance, the finance industry, I think.
Finance industry is another one that's a nightmare. But And if there's anybody listening to this podcast who is a financier or who works in the banking industry, I know what it's like. I worked here for 30 years. I worked as an advisor. I worked as a head of risk management, head of internal audit. I worked as an advisor to a regulatory body. But I still think, not just in the construction industry, but generally speaking, I still think and this is potentially controversial, I still think women are undervalued.
Yeah. Okay. And this was what I wanted to go on to next, is why is it? Why are women not making the progress that they need to make? And
simple as that. You know, you've got, we do a lot of work with universities. And if you look at the students at university doing construction courses or courses related to construction, it's a fairly good balance now in the universities we deal with. Are they encouraged to go and work in the construction industry? No, they're not. They're encouraged to go and do X, Y, and Z, which is, and I know people will disagree with us, but there's still this traditional, in my mind, there's still this tradition that women do certain things and only certain things. So they're not encouraged, and that's the problem, they're just not encouraged. But well, I'll tell you what, when you get them in there and you look at them, the vast majority do a really, really good job. A really good job. And so if any construction industry people are listening to this, hire them.
No, because I think the thing is as well, we as women, and I don't want this to be, you know, I think we need to all value each other. That's the thing. And as women, we are juggling a lot. In this day and age, I'm not saying that men aren't, but as women, we have to, you know, the statistics are out there, we still do most of the work around caregiving with our children, with elderly parents. We still do most of the work around the home. Now, I know, I'm not trying to be controversial here, because I know every situation and every relationship and every household is different. But even those women, I know, I've got friends that are, you know, directors, they are executives, and they've got massively supportive husbands, but you speak to them and it's always like, yeah, but I still do more when it comes to arranging the kids and sorting things out. And the reason that I say this is because we have developed these skills to just rise above everything. It makes us amazing. We are an untapped resource. The one thing, though, I find really difficult as well is that what I don't also want is for women to feel like they have to forget who they are as women. You know, we need to still maintain our femininity. This isn't about equality, isn't about treating everybody the same. I'm still a woman. You're still a man. There are still going to be, that's the whole point, okay? But when it comes to business, if we can work together and have those different energies, it makes such a difference. I mean, I was talking to somebody yesterday and he was saying, he owns a construction business, and he said, and it still is quite poor. It's still, you know, the executive board is still all white Corsican men of an age. And he said, but he said, we recognise that, and we're looking at kind of what we can get out externally to help diversify the way that we're thinking, which is great. And he said, but we still, because I said, what's it like being a man in a male-dominated industry? And he was like, well, you know, I still feel like I need to get my head down, get things done, you know, just not mess around. But that is a strength. That is something that when you then combine it with women who can be a little bit more empathetic, who can listen, who can bring, you know, a different edge to it, it makes it work so much better.
Yeah, I think one of the analogies I would give with this is, you mentioned at the start of this, I'm a big football fan, I am. And I watch not just men's football, and I watch women's football, and I watch youngsters as well quite a lot, in terms of trying to see what development they've got in terms of their skills and that sort of stuff. If you go back only, 15 years in this country, women's football was nothing. And women couldn't play football. That was that was what we were told. Women just couldn't play. They physically weren't capable of doing it. You know, their whole sort of makeup just didn't suit. You look at women's football now. Now, how did that come about? That came about for a number of reasons. One, because for certain football clubs, professional football clubs, both in England and in Scotland, and indeed elsewhere, particularly in Italy, you had women coming in as executives on the board of those clubs and saying, do you know what, why do we not just start a women's football team? And you look at women's football now, they have a hell of a lot more respect for officials than men's football do. Although that's changing, unfortunately, but they still have a lot more respect. B, can they play football? Can they just? Most of them, all over the place. And that investment, because of the initially the Italians and the Spanish, their women's football teams were successful. People were looking and thinking, in different countries were thinking, we could do that, but you've got to go back to the construction industry, you've got to put the investment into it, you've got to put the time and effort into it. And you've also got to have a strategic plan. And as I said earlier on, very few organisations we deal with at the initial stages have a strategic plan. And we then, because we're consultants, we then get the role of, if not developing the strategic plan, certainly being very, very influential in how that strategic plan is built. But if you've not got a strategic plan, it's never going to work. And we don't. And this country does not have a strategic plan. And trying to build 1.5 million houses in the next 5 years, it might work. If it does, they'll be poor quality, in my opinion. They'll be built in the wrong places, they'll be built for the wrong reasons. Do we need 1.5 million houses? I don't know, because I'm not into that kind of thing with government anymore. But there's too much, there's just too much sort of emphasis put on goals, which, does anybody actually believe we're going to build 1.5 million houses in 5 years? We've never done it before. So therefore, if you give that kind of target, and people don't, it's like net zero, you give the target of 2050, we'll be net zero by 2050, nobody believes it. And the government have had to come back now, instead of reporting year on year as to what their progress is against that target, the government have had, both in Scotland and in England, have had to say, we're not going to publish these figures anymore, because they're just meaningless now. So targets that are set, strategies that are set, have to be done with a lot more thought going into it. And I think that thought process, that willingness to challenge the current state of affairs, whether it's from males or females, I don't really care, but that willingness to challenge has to be improved. The opportunities to challenge rather than the willingness, the opportunities to challenge and not be decried for challenging. Another aspect of it, I think, in the construction industry, particularly, although not the only industry, but in the construction industry, I think it's something that needs to be done.
So what do you think is holding people back from challenging?
Fear.
Yeah.
Absolutely fear. You know, we do, because we do corporate governance training, we go into different boardrooms, different times. And it's amazing, even experienced executives of all ages who look at the chairman or a chief executive and just think, for a long time I worked in a bank in Scotland, and I better be careful what I say on this, but I worked for a CEO. I was on the executive committee. I was one of the people on the executive committee. I worked for a CEO who was never challenged on anything at all because people are frightened. And it's that excessive control that, in many cases, stops development happening, in my opinion. And you still see it.
And absolutely. And again, this is brings me right back round to what I was saying earlier and what I said on the course as well about how it's leadership, it's culture. You know, if you've still got, you know, people that are leading through fear, you've still got people that aren't leaders that don't believe that being a bit vulnerable and open to failure is a strength. And like you said before, this is where I think there is power in more. And I when I talk about having more women, I think we do need to, and not just because I am a woman, because I was going to say as well, not all women. You know, I don't want to delve too much into this. You know, given that we don't have a lot of time to, But I think that it's also about other diversities. It's about neurodiversity as well. Because again, they think about things differently and look at things differently. But the workplace isn't set up to nurture and encourage and accept people that potentially are neurodiverse, because we're so rigid as well in terms of the way that we're working. The whole 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, or being on site. Who says you have to be on site? I mean, don't get me wrong. There are logistics to think about, but there are also ways around things, because people, I get it all the time. You can't work flexibly in the construction industry. You just cannot. And I'm like, yeah, but you can. Yeah, absolutely, you can. You find solutions and you're going to start. That attitude that you can't work flexibly, it means that you are eliminating so many amazing people that could really drive the industry forward and could really, at the end of the day, we're having the biggest impact on the climate, on climate change. We're having the biggest impact on the planet. So this isn't just about creating a better construction industry. It's about creating a better world to live in.
I agree with that. I mean, in terms of neurodiversity, I'm a non-exec director on a company called Safe Soulmates,
Okay.
which is there to help people on the autistic spectrum. And that's all they, well, I say all they do, that's a bit of an insult. That is their whole focus, helping people on the autistic spectrum. And you're right, many of them, many people that we help are a part of the community, have low self-esteem, not because they're not good people, simply because they're not valued by others.
Yeah.
They're neurodiverse. And that frightens the life out of some people. But let me go back to something else that you've said in terms of leadership. I'm not sure that we've got an awful lot of leaders. I think we've got a lot of people who are CEOs and chairmen, but they're not necessarily leaders. They are more managers than leaders, in my opinion.
High five to that. But we do have, and I see it, we have some incredible leaders within organisations, but they are not given the opportunity to rise. They are not given the opportunity.
Why is that? Because the people at the top are petrified that they're going to lose their job. One of the mantras that when I was coming through the ranks and different jobs I did was that to be successful as a manager, the people that were in my team had to be more successful than me. Now, that wasn't only me that had that mantra. That's drilled into me by my dad and my granddad and people like that. And again, if you look at football, why is a football manager successful? Because he never goes on the park, but he's got the ability to gel that team together, get the right sort of skills and all the rest of it. But I think far too often at the top of the tree, an industry across, not just in the UK, but elsewhere as well, I think people are really frightened that somebody else coming up the line can do a better job than they are doing, and therefore they will lose their job. And that's why we don't move forward. That's a personal opinion. It's maybe controversial, but and the other thing is, we talk a lot about leadership in this nation, but we don't actually teach people how to be leaders. We teach them how to be managers, and we're pretty good at that. But what is leadership? Because it's completely different.
Absolutely. Could not agree with you more. I've done my ILMs, I've done, and none of it really taught me how to connect with people, how to be vulnerable, how to be empathetic, how to promote failure. That's leadership. And I was all I was taught was how to micromanage and how to how to performance manage people. It's just...
Yeah, and I think as well, in that context, what that tends to breed in many places is this, not just a fear that somebody else might come and take my job, or somebody else might look better than I do, or whatever the case may be, but it breeds a mechanism whereby, as a manager, my role is to make sure that you do the job not to the best of your ability, but you do the job that makes me look good rather than you look good.
Yeah.
And I think that's wrong, because I think when people are given you the opportunity to develop, bit of training, bit of development, bit of work. I mean, the Institute of Leadership now, I've done their courses as well to level 7, as I know you have as well. But again, I look at the training mechanism that goes through not every organisation, but a lot of training organisations. And for what it's worth, I think even those who are teaching leadership don't really practice leadership as such. And but that's potentially a very controversial opinion.
No, I totally agree. I
think the question is, how do we change that? And I think there needs to be an open debate. And that's another thing in this country. We don't really get very many open debates about things that we could do better. I quite like the American approach at times, because the failure is part of the American culture, whereas failure here is the end of your career in many cases. You fail, you fail. You know, those who don't fail don't succeed, in my opinion.
I love that. Well, I think just before we wrap it up, just one last question, if that's okay. And it's a bit of a visionary question, but what is the one thing that you would really like to see happen in 2025 when it comes to this topic around sustainability and climate change?
I'd like to see political leaders or those who lead political parties across the globe actually taking it seriously, because none of them do.
Yeah.
I think that you look at, I mean, I've attended a couple of COP meetings, but when you look at COPs and what they do, again, male dominated for a start, they're also dominated by fossil fuel industry and countries who are reliant upon fossil fuels, or at least the sale of fossil fuels. But take it seriously and actually get a strategic plan which helps as many nations as we can help. Because again, you've got this lack of development. The developing nations are way behind, but they get, in terms of economics, but they get the bulk of the problems that relate to climate change, whereas the problems are caused by developed nations. So, yeah, take it seriously. And if they could do that and people could get together and talk about it properly, without trying to score points off each other as well, because that just gets on my nerves. That would be my one wish. I could go on for ages. You know that, Rebecca. I could go on for ages, but I'm not.
I know, and you are going to come back onto this podcast when I'm doing.
Thank you.
I've got great plans for 2025, so I would love to have you back on, because I know that we've only just scratched the surface. But thank you so much, Billy, and
thank you.
And thank you everybody who is listening right now. If you've enjoyed this episode, make sure that you like it, you share it, you leave us a 5-star review, and that you go and check out Peak Governance and Billy, because honestly, as you've heard today, he is a fountain of knowledge and good sense. And I've really enjoyed this chat. Thanks again, Billy. And everybody listening, make sure that you do tune in next time.
Thank you for the invitation. I've really enjoyed it. I'd love to come back, but thank you very much.
Thank you for tuning in to the Healed Approach podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your network. Let's spread the word and drive the change our industry desperately needs. Stay connected with me on LinkedIn or at rebecca-heal.co.uk. And as always, keep pushing boundaries and making impact. Until next time.